Hi guys, welcome to Algebra 1, Lesson 74. This lesson has two parts to it. The first part is trinomials with common factors, and the second part is subscripted variables. Both are actually really easy. So the first part is trinomials with common factors. So we talked about factoring trinomials in yesterday's lesson. I hope that you thought it was fun, like I do. This lesson is the same idea, except in this lesson we're going to look at trinomials that actually have a greatest common factor for each of the terms in the trinomials. So before you go to factor, check your terms and see if they each have a common factor. If they do, factor out their greatest common factor. Then you'll have a smaller trinomial, it'll be easier to work with, and you can actually factor it because it will match the pattern that we have learned. So look at this one. X cubed plus 6x squared plus 5x. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So what's their greatest common factor? Well, their greatest common factor for numbers, they don't have one. They don't have common factors. But for variables, yes, they all have x's. The greatest number of x's that all of them have would be 1, because that's our smallest exponent. So I can divide each term by x to factor out that greatest common factor. So I'm going to rewrite my problem like this. I'm going to write the x first, because that's the factor I'm factoring out, times, now I'm going to rewrite my trinomial. So x cubed divided by x leaves me with x squared, taking out one of the x's, plus 6x squared divided by x leaves me with 6x, plus 5x divided by x cancels out my x, leaves me with 5. So now I have my new trinomial, and it matches the pattern that I've already looked at. So now when I go to factor it, I need to remember this x. I can't just drop it, okay, I keep it. But now I have that on the outside of the two parentheses that I write. So I know I have x squared, so I start with my x. Everything is positive, so that means that each of these are going to be positive. Now the factors of 5 are 1 and 5, 1 times 5. So it's x plus 1 and x plus 5. Super simple. All right, let's try another one. 4bx cubed minus 4bx squared minus 80bx, excuse me. All right, what's their greatest common factor? Well, for numbers, their greatest common factor would be 4, because 4 is the biggest factor of 4 and negative 4. It's also the biggest common factor with negative 80. So I know that 4 is the numerical greatest common factor, but how about my variables? Well, they all have 1b. How about x's? Do they all have x? Yes, they do. The greatest number that they all have is 1x. So 4bx is my greatest common factor. So I'm going to factor that out of each of my terms. So here, 4 divided by 4 is 1, b divided by b, it cancels. X cubed divided by x leaves me with x squared. Over here, I have minus 4bx squared. Well, negative 4 divided by 4 and negative 1. b divided by b cancels out. X squared divided by x leaves me with just x. So I'm left with minus x. I don't need to write negative 1x because 1 times anything is itself. So just negative x is fine. Then I have negative 80 divided by 4 gives me negative 20. My b cancels, my x cancels. So that's my trinomial. All right, so to factor it, I write 4bx, I can't just drop that. And then I have my two parentheses. Start with x. Now each one is negative. Because each one is negative, including the last one, that means that one answer is negative and the other answer is positive. So the factors of 20, that when I add it together, is going to equal a negative 1. Well, let's see, I have 5 times 4 equals 20. Those are right next to each other. So one has to be negative and one has to be positive. Well, since the answer when I add it together needs to be negative, that means the bigger number, the bigger factor needs to be negative. Negative 5 plus a positive 4 gives me a negative 1. So it's x plus 4 and x minus 5. If you have no idea what I just did there, me just talking through it doesn't show you, please let me know and I can show you on paper. Okay, let's try this one. Negative x squared plus x plus 20. Well, this one, I don't have any numbers per se that are my greatest common factors. However, my first term here is negative. that can get kind of complicated. So the easiest thing to do is to factor out the negative. How do I do that? I do that by dividing each term by -1, because a negative divided by a negative will give me a positive. So I have -1 in front. -1 divided by -x squared gives me just x squared. -1 divided by positive x gives me a negative x. 20 divided by -1 gives me a -20. So when you divide by a -1, you just flip all of the signs. Anything that was negative becomes positive, and anything that was positive becomes negative. Now, I can factor them. Hold on one second. Sorry, guys. -1. Draw my two parentheses. So I have x in one, x in the other. Now, I'm looking for a positive and a negative. And if you'll notice, this is exactly the same as this one was. Let me just show you this again. The factors of -20, they could be -1 and +20. They could be -20 and +1. I know that none of those added together is going to give me 1. They could be -2 and +10. They could be -10 and +2. None of those added together will give me 1. They could also be +4 and -5, or -4 and +5. Well, +4 plus -5 gives me -1. That's what I'm looking for there. So +4, -5. Okay? Now, this like this, you can leave it like this, that's fine, but really it's better to just go ahead and get rid of this -1 that's hanging out there, and you can multiply one of your binomials by -1, okay? So you can either multiply this first one and get negative x minus 4 times x minus 5. Or you can multiply the second one and have 4, x plus 4, and -1 times x is -x, -1 times -5 is +5. Either one of those are correct, okay? And it's better to just go ahead and multiply that -1 back in here than to have that -1 hanging out there in the front, okay? All right. Now, let's do the last one before we go to the second part of the lesson. -3x cubed minus 6x squared plus 72x. Let's find our greatest common factor. Well, I want to get rid of that negative, and 3 is a factor of each one of these, so my number greatest common factor would be -3. They each have an x. Greatest time it's used would be by all three of them is once, so 3x squared. So divide each term by -3x, leaves me with a positive x squared. -6 divided by -3 gives me a +2. X squared divided by x gives me just x. 72 divided by -3 gives me a -24. X divided by x is just 1, so 24 times 1 is 1, or excuse me, it's 24. So I have -24 there. Right? Then I set up my binomials with my parentheses. So I want the factors of -24 that are going to give me a +2x. So let me see. What factors, when I add them together, what factors of -24 when added together will give me 2? Well, think in your head, okay? Well, I know factors of 1 times 24. No, that can't be it. I have 2 times 12. No, that can't be it. 6 and 4. 6 and 4. So I have -6 times a +4, or I have a -4 times a +6. Well, -6 plus 4 gives me -2. -4 plus 6 gives me +2. I'm looking for +2, so it has to be -4 and +6. All right, and you leave your answer just like that. Okay, give me 1 minute and we'll come back to the second part of our lesson. Okay, so in the second part of our lesson, remember we've looked at equations like this. Solving the system of equations, 5x plus 10y equals 125, x plus y equals 16. We've looked at problems like that, solving them by either substitution or elimination. And we're just continuing to do that, but there's new types of variables. which would be n with a subscript. A subscript would be a letter underneath of it. We've seen letters with subscripts before. We use this just to clarify what we're representing. In a couple of lessons, we're going to look at problems that have to do with money, nickels, dimes, quarters. So to show specifically what you're looking at, you might see NN for the number of nickels, or ND for the number of dimes, NQ for the number of quarters. So we solve things the same way, you just have different looking variables. So let's solve these problems. Here I have 5NN plus 10ND equals 125. NN plus ND equals 16. Well, the easiest way to solve this one, by my mind, is to solve it through elimination. I'm going to multiply each term of this bottom equation by a -5, because it's the smallest number to work with, and it will easily eliminate this. So NN times -5, -5N, and D times -5 becomes -5D, and 16 times -5 becomes -80. I add those things together. This part cancels out because 5 minus 5 is 0, so 0 and n is 0. 10 minus 5 would be a 5 and d. 125 minus 80, because I'm adding a -80, would be 45. Divide both sides by 5, and I get that nd is equal to 9. Now I'm not quite done because I want to know what nn is as well. So I'm going to put it into my original equation, which was nn plus nd equals 16. I'm going to put it into that one because it's the smallest one, so it's easiest to work with. nn plus, we know nd is 9, equals 16. Subtract 9 from both sides. And n equals 7. Super simple, right? Sorry, my marker's acting funny. Okay, so I know that nn is 17 and nd is 9. Those are both your answer, okay? You need to know both. You need to have both labeled as your answer. Okay, so let's try the second example. 5nn plus 25nq equals 290. nq equals nn plus 2. I could move this around and do elimination, but why? Why bother? I can just substitute since I know that nq is equal to n plus 2. I'm going to put n plus 2 and n plus 2 in place of nq. So I have 5nn plus 25 times nn plus 2 equals 290. I'll multiply so I can simplify. 25nn plus, or 5nn, excuse me, plus 25nn plus 25 times 2 is 50 equals 290. Combine my terms, 5 plus 25 is 30, so I have 30 nn plus 50 equals 290. Now I subtract my 50 from both sides, so I'm left with 30 nn equals 240. Divide both sides by 30. I'm left with, and whoops, almost forgot my subscript. And n equals 8. Nice and simple. Okay, so now I want to put 8 in place of nn here so I can solve for nq. Because nq is equal to nn, which is 8, plus 2. So that means that nq is equal to 10. So that's my other part of my answer. Super simple, right? It's the same thing that we've been doing, you just have different kinds of variables. So pause now and do your practice. Okay, you should be back now. Letter A, you should have gotten -4x times x plus 3 times x plus 4. Now if you have that the other way around, x plus 4 times x plus 3, it's fine. Remember, no big deal. Letter B, now you could have written this two different ways. You could have written it as -x minus 4 times x minus 6, or with those the other way around. Or x plus 4 times -x plus 6. Those are your two options, okay? All right, letter C, you should have gotten nq equals 13 and nn equals 8. And letter D, you should have gotten nd equals 18 and nn equals -6. Okay, let me know if you have any questions, if you need any help with anything, and I would be more than happy to help you. Have a great day, guys. Love you very much. Bye.